There are two lines of history that lead up to the decision to build the atomic bomb. One is scientific history, and the other is political and military history. I'm going to start by talking about the scientific history leading up to the ability to make a decision to build an atomic bomb. Most people don't realize how much they know about science. The truth is that every human infant is a little scientist. There's a very good book called The Scientist in the Crib. I'll leave a link to it in the comments. And it details how in the first year of human life, the hard work that is done by an infant in order to make sense of what's coming to it by its senses. It sees colors, objects, lines, but it has not yet organized them into a coherent picture of the outside world. And what it has to do is to build a model in its brain of the outside world so that the visual stimuli correspond to something it can understand. And the methods it uses to do this are scientific methods. We're taught the scientific method in school, but actually we've been using it for years before that. Scientific method simply means making an observation, coming up with an explanation for that observation, and then testing the explanation to see if it fits other situations. If it doesn't fit, you have to throw the explanation away and start over with a new one. That, in its simplest form, is the scientific method, and that is done by every human infant. So we're all scientists at first. And you might well ask the question, why do we stop? Why do we cease to be scientists? And the answer is language. At the same time that the infant is making sense of its surroundings in the world, it's also learning language. And once it does that, once it has acquired language, the scientific method becomes of secondary importance, because it's much more efficient to learn facts by having someone tell you the facts than by actually discovering the facts for yourself. That's hard work. So beginning at about the second year of life, the little scientist leaves his scientific techniques behind and starts to learn from parents and other people around him. And the problem with this kind of learning is that unlike the scientific method, which has the very serious test of experiment, keeping it from straying very far from the truth, what people tell you isn't necessarily true. For me, the best example and the first example of this was the myth of Santa Claus. A great many conscientious parents conspire to lie to their children, to get them to believe in a creature called Santa Claus, which brings them gifts at Christmas time. Nobody actually believes this. None of the adults actually believe this. They're doing a con job on their own children. Perhaps the deeper reason why they're doing this con job is to fill in their children on the fact that people will lie to you later in life, and you have to be able to distinguish between truth and lies. So, when we come to scientific fact in later life, Many people have learned the lesson of skepticism too well. Many people assume that scientists are lying to them too. This is the situation we have today with climate change. It's obviously happening, but a very large number of people vigorously deny it, vigorously encourage an unhealthy skepticism, a skepticism of truth. If we go back in the history of science, one of the first really important scientists, especially in physics, is Sir Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was a great physicist. It was he who discovered both the laws of motion, the conservation of momentum, and the law of universal gravitation, which controls the motion of heavenly bodies in the sky and of not-so-heavenly bodies on Earth. But people forget that Newton was not just a physicist. He also tried to be a chemist. And he was a rotten chemist. He was an alchemist. The alchemists made a fundamental error in that they didn't admit the existence of elements, of immutable elements, things that could not be changed by any kind of chemical process. So they were stuck trying to convert lead to gold and nonsense like that, instead of proceeding in a correct direction. And Isaac Newton was one of the people who were involved in this false activity, this doomed activity of trying to understand chemistry without doing elements.